I always refer myself to the beginnings and how this collaboration started and then, of course, unfolded and evolved gradually to, across time and space. And here I'm talking about different times, from perhaps talking about the project here in Oxford as somebody who came to the UK as a refugee, and then to be able to return to my home camp, and not just the possessive in this my camp or home, but also to be able to see these things from the positionality of somebody who's, yes, of course, I'm still a refugee. I'm still a refugee within that context. And I'm also seeing my family, but to be able to collaborate and work with other refugees. So these different perceptions of what our work is supposed to be have enabled us as a team, not just individually here, to see how the humanities, or the literary component, let's call it literary perhaps loosely, is not the cosmetically, is not there as a subsidiary component, but is there to ensure that this freedom is maintained throughout the project. It is important for me as well to see how myself as a writer can respond to these situations, and also write about them from the perspective of the refugee researcher, or the researcher who's also a refugee. And the culmination of this has been wonderful, because the productivity that is attached to the project itself is also my individual productivity as a writer, who's been able to pursue certain themes, but also under the overarching title of writing the camp, and writing different sort of, in fact, perceptions of what a refugee camp is. So this in itself resulted in this, in fact, book, which is wonderful for me to see. So it is the personal plus the collaborative that created this book. And within this, or these texts, in fact, we have very subtle and discreet perceptions and collaborations with other refugees and other fellow writers, and that is why, to be able to convert the oral to the written, and to be able to say to myself that this project is not just there for a few years, it's there as something that hopefully would continue beyond this time frame. What is really, in fact, fascinating about the workshops, the writing workshops, and the translation as well workshops that we've held in camps, we end up not just working with people who know how to write, but in fact with those who can't write. And this may be a new, I call it, space, which is formed by mainly conversing with those who can't write about what they would like to write, and how this shared text becomes, in fact, the product of not just the individual himself, herself, but also of how at times certain responses are formulated in situ. And these are really incredible encounters in their own right. And not just creatively, but also how those who cannot write at times are overlooked from such programs and research projects. So to allow, or maybe to invite those who would like to take part, and yet they assume that perhaps they don't have the right tools to do so, to play a role, has been a very important dimension and in fact a substantial component of the work that we've done. So to translate is also about consulting. It's also about understanding the particularities of these texts, of what these people would like to share with us. And that's why the vast majority of the participants, in fact, submitted, whether on the spot or at times they would take their texts with them, the drafts, and work on them further and then resubmit them. But to see the handwritten, to see these very personal traces, I think that it's to translate these very material, very personal, very personal touches and into another language, into English, and for the sake of the project. Also, of course, we haven't been able to contain and preserve every single element within these drafts and texts, but at least, and this is something that we are doing at the moment, is to acknowledge that these are only parts of a whole that belongs to the participant himself, herself. So our maybe fragmentary, let's call them, translations are very, let's call them creative responses to the wholeness that these people have been able to produce on the spot. To see the ways in which these texts are formed, written, produced, and which, for instance, let's use, of course, use the term stories here or narratives loosely, those participants wanted to share with us, and which bits we are allowed to see. And without, of course, putting pressure, coercing the people into perhaps saying more, has made us realize that we are witnessing a creation or the creation of texts which are incredibly intimate insofar as they convey not just the personal, but also their own projections of this very, very ambiguous future, to be in a city, but not in your hometown, to be in a camp, but not in a city. And these are all things that we tried our best to handle sensitively, and sensitively at times meant with silence, and not to get involved, and to give people just the time and the space to write what they themselves wanted to write. I still remember, in fact, and this is really very, very, very touching, but also very, very pertinent to research altogether, how some participants, in addition, of course, to writing, they had wanted to share some significant things with us, personal items that they themselves brought to share with us, but also to, in fact, to tell us more about the significance of such things, items, and how they relate to their times in the past, in the present, but also how they connect with a future that is somewhat very, very vague and very precarious. So the combination between the material, the actual thing, and the text also as a materiality, and then, of course, the writing, to see it before our eyes. These are all facets that should also become more integral of research as we move forward, and not just there to fill in perhaps temporary gaps, but there to stay as a new mode of communication, as a new form of knowledge, where knowledge is shared, where knowledge is produced afresh by these participants. So our role at times was mainly to witness the creation of such things and the creation of such knowledge. And this knowledge is theirs first and foremost.